On October 10th, 2023, police arrived at a home on the north side of Milwaukee. What they found inside would leave them stunned. It wasn't just a lifeless body they discovered, but the painful truth of a life that had slowly withered away in silence. A 12-year-old boy, whose name was Jacarie Robinson, was found lying motionless on the living room floor, surrounded by filth and decay. His body had been neglected, starved, and hidden from the world for weeks. It was clear that no one had reached out for help, no alarms had been raised, and no one had even noticed the suffering he endured in the dark corners of his own home. Jacarie's death was a tragedy that could have been prevented, and yet no one had a clue. His father, Romuan Moye, was the one who had full custody of him. He was the one responsible for Jacarie's care, but for reasons unknown, he chose to hide his son away from the world. There were no calls to 911. No one went searching for the boy. No reports to the authorities. The silence around Jacarie's life and death would remain unbroken, at least until the day his older brother, Jay, made the painful discovery. Jay walked into the house on October 10th, only to find his brother, malnourished and lying cold on the floor. He had no idea that when he walked in that day, it would be the last time he would ever see his brother alive. The question that lingers in the air is a haunting one. How could this happen? How did a child like Jacarie fall through the cracks, ignored and isolated in his own home, while his father lived in the same house, claiming to be dying and keeping people at bay? Where are you watching from right now? Let me know in the comments. And as you hear Jacarie's story, tell me, how does a child suffer like this for so long, without anyone stepping in? Jacarie Robinson was just 12 years old. He wasn't known in the neighborhood. There were no friends knocking on the door asking if he could come outside to play. There were no school photos, no parent-teacher meetings, no football games or birthday parties with classmates. Because Jacarie wasn't enrolled in school, he was homeschooled, or at least that's what his father claimed. What we now know is that he was being hidden, slowly removed from the world around him, piece by piece, day by day. He lived in a house on North Elmhurst Road in Milwaukee, a place that, from the outside, looked just like any other quiet family home. But inside those walls, something was deeply wrong. His older brother, Jay Moye, remembers Jacarie not for the way he died, but for the way he lived, sweet, quiet, loving. He was my everything. Jacarie was Jacarie. No matter what, Jay said, trying to hold back tears in a phone interview days after discovering his little brother's body. You could hear it in his voice. The kind of grief that only comes from losing someone you felt responsible for. Jay and Jacarie didn't live together. They were brothers separated not by distance, but by decisions made by adults around them. Jay had grown up and moved out, but Jacarie stayed behind, with their father, Romuan Moye, a man with a criminal history, a man who had convinced the world he was managing fine. In reality, he had built walls so high around Jacarie that no one could see what was happening behind them. Jacarie's mother was no longer in the picture. Court records are quiet about her role. But what's clear is that Romuan Moye had full custody of the boy. And in the months leading up to October 2023, he didn't let many people near the house. Family members noticed Jacarie wasn't showing up to gatherings anymore. Neighbors didn't hear laughter or footsteps or even music coming from the home. And when they asked about the boy, Romuan would wave them off or change the subject. He started telling people he was sick, that he had cancer, that he didn't have much longer to live. And perhaps that story was true, but it also served another purpose. It kept people from asking too many questions. Just a very quick one. I want to say a very big thank you for joining me on today's case. If this is your first time here, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Let's get back quickly into the case of Jacarie. One family friend said the last time they saw Jacarie was in August, on his 12th birthday. He looked extremely skinny, they recalled. And when they asked him if he was okay, Jacarie quietly said, "No." Just one word. Soft. almost like he knew no one could help him, even if they tried. That friend would later say that Romuan was a harsh punisher, known for grounding his children for weeks at a time. The punishment wasn't always physical, but it was always isolating. This wasn't just a case of strict parenting. It was a slow erasure of a child. Jacarie had no school, no teachers, no classmates, and eventually, no contact with the outside world. For months, he existed only inside that house. The walls became his world, and no one, not a neighbor, not a relative, not a social worker, came to check if he was okay. In those final weeks, we don't know exactly what he felt, what he ate, or if he cried out for help. But we know this: he had a broken arm, a broken leg, 2 fractured ribs, bones that had started healing on their own. No hospital visits, no medical attention. He was wasting away in silence, and the only person who could have saved him had already given up. Moye never stopped loving his little brother. But by the time he stepped into that house on October 10th, it was too late. He wasn't prepared for what he saw. And even now, he says it's something he'll never forget. A part of him was buried that day, and the rest of him is still searching for answers. If a child doesn't go to school, doesn't see a doctor, and barely leaves the house, who's responsible for making sure they're safe? Should someone have noticed? Should someone have stepped in? Let me know in the comments. What would you have done if this was happening on your street? By the time most children are 12, they've made a few best friends, had a birthday party or two, and maybe even started to discover what makes them unique. But for Jacarie Robinson, life didn't include any of that. There were no school desks, no classmates calling his name, no teachers asking him to raise his hand. He was homeschooled, that's what his father said. But no records could confirm it. No teachers ever reported anything unusual, because to them, Jacarie didn't exist. He hadn't stepped into a classroom in years. He didn't walk to the corner store. He didn't play outside like other kids his age. To the neighbors, the house had been quiet for months. The shades were always drawn, the front yard untouched. It was as if time stood still inside that house. And that silence? It was hiding a secret. One neighbor, someone who had known the family for years, told investigators that they hadn't seen Jacarie since his birthday, way back in August. It was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became a silent warning that no one caught. They remembered him standing at the doorway, barely stepping outside. His clothes hung loosely on his tiny frame. His arms looked like twigs. His face was sunken in, and his eyes tired, hollow, almost begging. The neighbor had asked gently, "Are you okay?" And in a voice so low it was almost missed, Jacarie had said just one word: "No." That was the last time anyone outside the house ever saw him alive. The same witness said they tried to ask more, but Romuan, Jacarie's father, quickly ended the conversation. He told them the boy had been acting out, that he needed to be disciplined, that he was being dealt with. Weeks passed, then a month. Still no sign of Jacarie. No laughter from the windows. No birthday photos. No school reports. Nothing. And yet no one called. No one reported anything. The system didn't flag a missing child. There was no welfare check. Because technically, nothing was wrong, on paper. Meanwhile, inside the home, Jacarie's world was shrinking. The doors were locked. The curtains stayed closed. The food was kept away. And the man who was supposed to protect him, the one person who had full custody, was slowly cutting him off from everything and everyone. There were signs, little ones, but they were ignored. Or maybe people didn't want to see them. Maybe they thought it wasn't their place to ask questions. And all the while, Jacarie was there, just a few feet away, waiting, hoping someone would notice. But no one did. Not yet. If you hadn't seen a neighbor's child in weeks, maybe even months, would you say something? Or would you assume everything's fine behind closed doors? Tell me in the comments. How much is too long to go without seeing a child before we speak up? On the day of this strange discovery, the sun had barely risen when a concerned citizen made their way to the house on North Elmhurst Road. It wasn't their first time there, but something felt different that morning. They'd come to check on Romuan Moye. He hadn't been answering calls. He hadn't come outside in days. And the last time they spoke to him, he claimed he was dying, said he had cancer, that he didn't have long to live. It sounded strange, desperate even. But Moye had always been a little guarded, evasive. That morning, the visitor just wanted to make sure he was okay. They knocked. No answer. They called out, "If you're in there, please come out." Still nothing. So they tried the door. It creaked open. And within seconds, the smell hit them like a wall. A thick, choking stench that clung to their skin and burned in their nose. It was more than just a bad odor. It was the smell of something terribly wrong. Something decaying. Something dead. They stepped inside. The living room was dark. Quiet. Still. And then they saw it. Lying on the floor, barely clothed, twisted, and lifeless, was the body of a young boy. It was Jacarie. His tiny frame was decomposing, his skin sunken and pale. The body looked like it had been there for weeks. The witness stood frozen. For a long moment, they didn't move. They couldn't. It was too much to process. The boy everyone thought was just homeschooled, the boy who acted out, the boy no one had seen since August, was gone. And no one even knew. The rest of the house was no better. The kitchen floor was covered in piles of trash. Rotten food sat open on the counters, green with mold. The refrigerator was packed with expired items, each more spoiled than the next. On the table, more trash, more filth. The smell of feces mixed with decay was unbearable. The bathroom hadn't been cleaned in months. The sink was black with mold. The toilet stained and overflowing. The smell soaked into the walls. It wasn't just neglect. It was something far worse. This wasn't a home. It was a tomb. And Romuan Moye? He was nowhere to be found. He'd vanished. Left everything behind, including the body of his own son. The witness ran out of the house and called the police. And what started as a quiet welfare check quickly became a full-blown homicide investigation. Jacarie hadn't just died. He had withered away, alone, in filth, with no food, no care, and no one to fight for him. And now, the question wasn't just what happened. It was, how long had it been happening? And who else, if anyone, had known? Imagine walking into a house and finding a child like that. Would you ever be the same again? And here's the hard truth. How many times do we ignore a smell, a silence, or a closed door because we don't want to get involved? What would you have done in that moment? Let me know in the comments. As news of Jacarie's death spread, one question echoed louder than all the rest. Where was Romuan Moye? He hadn't been seen since the body was found. Not by family, not by neighbors, not by police. It was as if he had vanished without a trace. But in the weeks leading up to that grim discovery, there were signs. People close to him recalled strange conversations. Moye had started telling people he had cancer, that he was dying, that he didn't have much time left. Some believed him. Others weren't so sure. But one thing was clear. He had become more evasive than ever. He avoided visits, ignored phone calls, stopped answering the door. It wasn't just grief or sickness. It was something else, something heavier. And during that time, no one had seen Jacarie. Not once. He used to play outside, ride his bike, wave at neighbors. But by late summer, those glimpses disappeared. People assumed he was just being homeschooled, maybe grounded, maybe sick. But the truth was far worse. One witness later told police that Moye had confessed Jacarie was acting really bad, and so he'd been keeping him inside, away from everyone. That was his punishment. But punishment wasn't new in that house. People who knew Moye described him as a harsh disciplinarian. Cold, controlling, someone whose punishments could last not just days, but weeks. He didn't believe in second chances. He didn't believe in letting things slide. And more than anything, he didn't believe in anyone questioning him, not even his own children. He ruled that home with silence. And Jacarie? He had no voice. His world had gotten smaller and smaller, until eventually, it was just 4 mold-covered walls. Romuan Moye kept everyone out, and in doing so, he buried the truth behind locked doors and lies. But the truth was now out, and Moye, wherever he was, had to answer for it. Or did he? Because as the days passed, and news reports aired, and family mourned, Romuan Moye still hadn't turned himself in. He was on the run, and the world wanted to know, was this a broken man running from grief? Or a monster escaping justice? Do you think claiming to be sick was just a distraction, or part of a bigger plan to avoid justice? And how many times have we seen abusers hide in plain sight, using sympathy as their shield? What do you think Moye was really running from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from you. When the medical examiner finally got their hands on Jacarie's body, the horrific truth of his suffering became painfully clear. What they found was more than just a malnourished child. It was a broken body, a body that had been trapped in misery for far too long. The first thing the autopsy revealed was a broken right leg. But it wasn't fresh. It had healed. The bone had grown over itself, forming a hard, jagged callus that spoke volumes about the neglect Jacarie had suffered. This wasn't an accident. This was a child left to suffer without care, without help. And then there was his left leg, suspected to be fractured as well, though the exact details remained unclear. His bones had been weakened over time, possibly from lack of proper nutrition or improper care. They could only guess at the amount of pain Jacarie had endured. But that wasn't the worst of it. 2 of his ribs were broken. Just like the legs, they had started to heal. But the pain, the agony, the brokenness, it was all still there. In his ribs, in his legs, and in his heart. The examiner noted that Jacarie's body was extremely emaciated, so thin, so frail, that it seemed almost impossible. He weighed just 54 pounds. A 12-year-old child should have weighed nearly double that. But this was the reality for Jacarie. His body was starved. Not just for food, but for love, for care, for the basic things that every child deserves. The body was a map of suffering. And the decomposition, moderate but unmistakable, confirmed just how long Jacarie had been alone. He had been dead for up to a month. It was a tragedy, a life stolen before it even had a chance to blossom. His body told the story that his voice could not. And yet, despite all the clear signs of abuse, the cause of death remained pending. The medical examiner still needed to complete toxicology and histology tests to confirm exactly what had taken Jacarie's life. But the physical evidence alone spoke volumes. When you hear about a child suffering in silence like Jacarie did, it's hard to imagine the pain they went through. Do you think the physical signs were enough to uncover the truth? What do you think was the final blow that took his life? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear what you think. For J. Moye, the moment of discovery would haunt him forever. Imagine the scene, walking into a home, calling out for your loved one, and instead of hearing a response, you're struck by the unbearable silence. But for Jay, that silence was followed by something worse, a sickening odor, a smell so strong, it hit him like a wall. He walked through the house, searching for his brother, and then, in the living room, he saw it. Jacarie's lifeless body. He had never imagined that this would be the moment he would find his brother, the boy who had once been his everything, the one he had shared his childhood with. Jay's words, when he spoke about that moment, were simple but filled with sorrow. It was very hard for me and my family. But those words, hard, barely scratched the surface of what they had just discovered. How could a father do this? How could someone so close, someone who should have cared, let his child live like this? Hidden away, starved, and broken. Jay was left with more than just pain. He was left with questions. Why didn't anyone know? Why didn't anyone speak up? How did they all miss the signs? The family, in the aftermath of Jacarie's death, struggled to piece together the timeline. They tried to understand how things had gotten so bad. What had happened during the months of isolation? How did a healthy 12-year-old boy, one who should have been playing with friends, going to school, end up like this? At first, they had no idea. They hadn't known Jacarie was suffering, locked away from the world. All they knew was what Moye had allowed them to see. And that wasn't much. As Jay and the rest of the family searched for answers, they were left in the dark. They had been blinded by Moye's control over their lives, unaware of the suffocating grip he had on Jacarie, the harsh punishment, the isolation, the lies. And now, they had to deal with the painful realization. They had been kept in the dark for far too long. They had trusted the wrong person. Imagine finding your sibling like Jay did. What would you do? How do you think the family felt, piecing together the horror after Jacarie's death? Do you think the signs were there all along, or were they just too blind to see? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear how you would have reacted. The discovery of Jacarie's body marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Jay and his family, but for the justice system. It didn't take long before the authorities caught up with Romuan Moye. And once they did, it became clear that he wasn't going to escape the consequences of what he had done. Moye was charged with several heinous crimes: first-degree reckless homicide, chronic child neglect resulting in bodily harm, and failure to report the death of a child. But as the legal process unfolded, there was one unsettling reality. Moye wasn't going to go down without a fight. At first, it seemed like the case was a sure thing. The evidence was undeniable. The broken body of a 12-year-old child, the heart-wrenching testimony of his brother, the grim scene inside the home. But Moye's legal team had a different idea. 2 additional charges of neglect were dismissed, although they were still read into the record. The reasoning? It was all part of a plea deal that would ultimately reduce Moye's sentence. The charges, though dropped, were not forgotten. They were there, part of the record, reminding everyone of the suffering Jacarie endured. As the days passed, the weight of the case began to take a toll. The horrific nature of the crime weighed heavily on the court, the investigators, and even the family. But despite the severity of the situation, Moye, who had once tried to play the victim, claiming his own terminal illness, chose to plead guilty to the 3 major charges. Why? Because there was no escape from the truth. And though it wasn't the confession everyone was hoping for, at least it meant the family wouldn't have to endure a long, drawn-out trial. For Moye, it was a choice between facing life in prison or making a deal that would let him serve a smaller sentence. 47.5 years in total, plus 25 years of extended supervision after his release. The plea deal was struck, and while it provided some closure, it still felt hollow. A 12-year-old boy's life had been stolen, and no legal proceedings could ever undo the pain. Do you think Moye's plea deal was fair given the severity of his crimes? How does it make you feel knowing he will eventually be released after serving his sentence? Should justice be more about retribution or rehabilitation? Drop your thoughts below. Let's discuss what justice really means in this case. As the courtroom fell silent, Judge Laura Crivello raised her gavel, ready to deliver the sentence that would mark the final chapter of this tragedy for now. Romuan Moye was sentenced to 47.5 years in prison, a staggering length of time that would make him an old man by the time he was released. The judge also ordered 25 years of extended supervision once he eventually walks out of prison, ensuring that the community would be under some form of protection long after his time behind bars. The sentence brought mixed feelings. For Jacarie's family, it was a small measure of justice, a stark reminder that his death didn't go unnoticed. But that was all it could ever be. Justice, at its core, would never bring Jacarie back. For those who knew Jacarie, and even for those who didn't, the aftermath of his death left a long-lasting impact on the entire community. Many couldn't help but reflect on the failures that led to this moment. How had the system allowed a 12-year-old boy to wither away in isolation, neglected by the very people who should have protected him? Where was the community? How had no one raised alarm when Jacarie hadn't been seen for months? How had his cries for help gone unnoticed by those who could have intervened? In the end, Jacarie's story was a stark reminder of the consequences of silence and isolation. It was a painful truth that echoed in the hearts of his family and everyone who had been touched by this case. He was only 12, and no one heard his cry. The final tribute to Jacarie was a quiet, somber moment. where everyone was left to reflect on the precious life that was lost too soon, and the price of ignoring the signs of a child in need. The tragedy of Jacarie Robinson's life and death serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the loudest cries for help are the ones that go unheard. In the end, Jacarie Robinson's life was cut short by a father's cruelty and a system that failed to notice the signs of abuse. At just 12 years old, Jacarie suffered in silence, and it was only after his tragic death that the truth began to unfold. Now, as his father faces decades in prison, we're left to wonder, what could have been done differently to save this innocent child from a fate so horrifying? If you were moved by Jacarie's story and want to learn more about cases like his, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with others. Stay informed, stay vigilant, and always keep an eye out for the signs of children in need. Together, we can make sure no one else suffers in silence. See you in my next video. Until then, please stay safe.